Unless my plan, I just had to tell my partner for the after brunch that I don't know if I can eat. Like, if you give someone the money and price them, but I know that the whole so part that I know like was doing I can go to be a side dinner.
By the way, we're recording this, which will start at any moment. So if you're camera shy, or you're here with somebody that you shouldn't be here with, just letting you know.
I just didn't get my email, guys.
Ryan, would you let us know when you're starting? We're good to go. Yep. We're good to go, Nick. I mean, Mr. Meyer. Here he is. I'd just like to say that I'm thrilled and honored to have published this book and to host Nicholas Meyer for this event. It's unfortunate that he's a fraud because it's credit for having written it, but he actually just found it. So it's like an Easter egg. So lots of credit for finding this book that John H. Watson wrote. Arthur Conan Doyle took the same credit. You know, poor Watson. Everybody forgets that he's the author of these books. But I think Nick actually did a little fine tuning, a little editing to make it crisper and more literary.
I saved it.
It's like in Hollywood going to a producer with a screenplay, and the producer looks at it and says, "Oh my God, this is brilliant! It's the best dialogue I've ever seen. The action sequences are beautiful. These characters are wonderful, and I think we can sing it." True story from Brian Garfield, Hopscotch and Death Wish. Anyway, so no, Nick actually did write these. I was just the Star Trek people had no idea what. So I just thought I'd clarify that he actually did write every single word of this book, and they're very good words. They're actually in the right sequence to make this book a thrilling read. The reviews, by the way, have been fantastic. You know, you may not, if you're not publishing people, you may not know that we send review copies out to the trade magazines, Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, Kirkus Reviews, places like that, and then they review that and that their magazine, their publication goes out to booksellers and libraries all around the world. So we are always eager to see what those reviews are like. And almost without exception, the reviews have been spectacular and saying, and I don't know if you think this is a good thing or a bad thing, but his best book since The 7% Solution. So if so Nick is going to, Mr. Meyer, proper respect, is going to do a little reading from it, so you'll see how good these words are. And we'll talk about the book a little bit. And I think probably without further ado, I should let you know that this book is based on a true story. It's a true World War I story that was a major historic event based on something called the Zimmerman telegram, or the Zimmerman letter, the way I learned it in school 100 years ago when it was first happening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nicholas Meyer.
Thank you very much for coming downtown and to the unveiling of this opus It actually doesn't say that I wrote it. It only says that I edited it. What I thought I would do is to give you what the French restaurant people called an amuse-bouche, a little taste. This is only the first 35 pages. It won't really take that long. And then we can talk about whatever we want to talk about in connection with it. These pages that I'm reading from are from the diary of John H. Watson, and the entry that I'm reading from is the 2nd of June, 1916. Another blood-soaked day. I am spent after 10 hours in surgery. It was nightfall before I could eat the cold supper Mariah had set out for me and bring myself to read the Times, there to learn of more millions dying on the Western Front, where the slaughter continues unabated. As both patient and surgeon, I have known the terrible price of battle, but this surpasses anything in my experience. It is hard to believe that the extinction of an entire generation is the price England must pay to prevent the German double-headed eagle waving over Buckingham Palace and the imbecilic Kaiser sitting on his grandmother's throne. I had thought to retire after Juliet's death, but instead of finding time for grief, I am obliged to exhaust myself under the stench of ether and carbolic, treating maimed and disfigured young men, many little more than boys, who return from France amid a never-ending flood of viscera and missing parts, some arriving still in the remnants of the uniforms in which they were wounded. All bear the same faraway look, as though they were seeing not what was before their eyes, but something unimaginable behind them. Fulham Road is choking on a river of ambulances streaming from the train stations. I am literally trembling with fatigue and know my days as a surgeon are numbered. But the day's travails turn out to have scarcely begun. Sitting alone at my dining table, I became aware of a moaning that I originally imagined to be a summer breeze soughing in the chimney. But the sounds soon resolved themselves into what was unmistakably human. Mariah was weeping in the pantry. Mariah, who had been with us for more years than I care to remember, first engaged by Juliet at the start of our marriage, has served us since with never a murmur of complaint, helping nurse Juliet through the last terrible months of her illness, and then staying on to see to my widower's needs ever since. She had a gentleman friend some time ago, but lately I've not seen or heard of him. I dare not ask why. The sobs persisted, so I set down my napkin and wandered into the larder, where I found the poor woman in her chair trying to muffle her cries in a dish towel. Mariah, what is it? She started and looked at me as guiltily as if I'd caught her stealing the spoons. I'm sorry, doctor. She dabbed furiously at her eyes with a towel. Forgive me. I'm sure there's nothing to forgive, Mariah. What's wrong? She shook her head, unwilling or unable to reply. I put a hand on her quaking shoulder. Come, tell me. She allowed my hand to steady her. Taking several deep breaths, she removed the towel and spoke into it. It's Harry, my nephew, Mount Sorel, wheresoever that is. Oh, Mariah. My sister's youngest? Only 17, she wailed. I knew for a fact that scenes like ours were played out daily. There was not a home untouched by the war. It was as if the Old Testament angel of death had flown over Britain instead of the Egypt of Moses. Are they certain? She nodded vigorously. They got the telegram this morning. Poor Nellie's youngest, she repeated. And that after Garth and all the rest. And then, unable to contain herself, she threw herself into my arms, bursting into hot, bitter tears once more. Why? Why doesn't it end? Will it never end? I held her awkwardly. You might better ask why it even began, I murmured. She lifted her red, tear-streaked face to peer up into mine. Why did it? Why did it? Why must they all die? Everyone said it would be short. They promised. Home before the leaves fall, I remember. Come, let me pour you some brandy. I never touch it, doctor. Just tonight. I lowered her into the chair, fetched a plain glass, and poured a draught into it. Come, only a swallow. She obeyed, coughing on the drink, wiping fresh tears away with the back of her hand. No one understands. We hate the Germans. The Germans hate us. But the royal family, ain't they German too? Only 17, she repeated, swallowing the rest of the brandy at a gulp and huddling bent over, gasping for breath as the liquor did its temporary work. Poor girl, what could I tell her? How to explain the quicksand of entangling alliances that dragged all Europe into this cesspool of blood? Alliances I can scarcely understand myself. No matter how many times speeches and posters have attempted to pound the facts into my head, that an Austrian archduke's assassination in faraway Serbia, wheresoever that is, as Mariah might say, had somehow brought in Austrians and the Germans and their strutting war-hungry Kaiser to back them on the one side, forcing Russia, France, England, and Australia to honor their alliances with little Serbia on the other. None of that would account for her nephew's death, or her father's, or two brothers, all of which she had stoically endured to this point, with British resolve and a stiff upper lip. But young Harry, torn to pieces at Mount Sorel, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Amid these saturnine reflections, we were startled by the bell. Instantly, Mariah was on her feet, straightening her apron. I'll see to it, doctor. Nonsense, Mariah. Go up to bed. I'll deal with whoever it is. Go on now. Thank you, doctor. Scouring her eyes yet again with the heels of her hands, she fled upstairs. The bell rang again. Would this day never end? Wondering who on earth might be calling so late, I slipped on my jacket and bolted the door, astonished to behold a figure emerging like a wraith from a thick, sulphurous fog. Holmes? May I come in? His voice was ragged, not the familiar crisp tones to which I was long accustomed. Certainly. I had not seen my singular friend for over a year. Always favoring a touch of the dramatic, the detective could not have devised a better entrance. I stood aside to let him pass, wondering not only at his unexpected presence, but also his appearance. For despite the indifferent lighting, I could see that he sported a black eye and a chipped bicuspid. And a cracked rib, I fear, he confided, noting my confusion. Holmes, what has happened to you? Who has done this? Could you see the blackguards? I did it to myself, Watson. Or rather, it was done at my direction. That's all you get. If this writing thing doesn't work out, you could always get a job as an actor. I couldn't.
You can see why the reviews have talked about Nick's, and you forgive me if I use Nick rather than Mr. Meyer on a regular basis, it's just shorter.
So am I.
Not that I. Why a lot of the praise had to do with Nick's ability to write very much in the cadence and tone and style of Arthur Conan Doyle, which is not easy to pull off. There have been thousands of Sherlockian pastiches written in the last half century or more, and very few of them achieve what Nick just has, and I think we all appreciate that. So this is based on a true story. The very first book that you did was based on a true story, which is Jack the Ripper. And most of your other books have been based on historical events. Why are you drawn to that? Does that work best for you as a starting off point?
I'm not sure quite how to answer that question. I fell in love with the Sherlock Holmes stories when I was about 11, and my dad gave me the complete works to read. There's 60 of them, and I inhaled them, and you learn a lot of history while you're reading them. The Study in Scarlet is how I learned about Mormons, and The Sign of the Four is how I learned about the Indian Mutiny. And so it was not unnatural. I also, I think, fell in love with Doyle's English, which is to say Victorian English, whether we're talking about H. Rider Haggard or Robert Louis Stevenson or Charles Dickens or Anthony Trollope or George Eliot. I like the English. I like the sound of it. And the thing about Sherlock Holmes that people sort of ask me, why do you think he remains so popular? It's a question I have no means of answering, but I do know that it seems for me to take place in a world long ago enough and far away that it has a kind of mythical or fairy tale sort of aspect, but close enough to now that we recognize everything about it, whether you're using the telephone or the telegram or whatever. And so it strikes a kind of a nice place for me, and a lot of interesting things were happening during his lifetime. A lot of people. So the book, the 7% Solution book, actually began really gestating when in high school, and people said, "Oh, your old man's a shrink. Is he a Freudian?" Remember, a shrink is a Jewish doctor who can't stand the sight of blood. And I said, "Pop, are you a Freudian?" And he said, "Well, it's sort of a silly question." And I said, oh, why is that? And he said, "Because it's no more possible to discuss the history of psychoanalysis and not start with Freud than it is to discuss the history of America's discovery by Europeans without starting with Columbus or the Vikings, if you want to get technical. But to suppose that nothing has happened since the Vikings is to be pretty rigid, pretty doctrinaire. When a patient comes to see me, I listen to what they say. I listen to how they say it. I'm very interested in what they don't say. I'm interested, are they on time? What's their body language? What kind of clothes are they wearing? In short, I'm looking for clues from them as to why they're not happy." And I said, "Gee, Pop, that sounds like detective work." And he said, "Well, it is like detective work." And at this point, a little light bulb went off in my head, and I found myself wondering, how much did Arthur Conan Doyle know about the life and writing of Sigmund Freud, or vice versa? And the first thing you understand or realize is they're both doctors, and they both died in the same town within 9 years of each other. And then you learn that Sherlock Holmes was a cocaine addict, and so for a time was Sigmund Freud. And these sort of coincidences, and then I learned that, Freud's favorite bedtime reading was the Sherlock Holmes story. And in fact, when you read some of Freud's case history, it does sound kind of like Watson. And in fact, at one point he even says, I followed the labyrinth of her mind, Sherlock Holmes-like, until it led me to the... You have to be a lot duller knife in the drawer than me. Not something is here. And so I went to California to seek my fortune in the movie business, and of course we went on strike, which the Writers Guild does every chance we get. And so you weren't allowed to write screenplays, and I had just begun to have some little success writing television movies, and now you weren't allowed to. And so my girlfriend said, now you can write that Sherlock meets Sigmund book you were talking about. And that's how that book started, with him meeting a historical person. And the book was quite successful, and you know it's successful when they ask you for another one. And that one, the West End Horror, was about Holmes in the theater world. Well, once you look at Holmes in the theater world and you find a gap in the chronology where you can put him, then there's George Bernard Shaw, there's Oscar Wilde, there's Henry Irving, there's Ellen Terry, there's Gilbert and Sullivan, there's Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula while working for Henry Irving and Ellen Terry. So yeah, historical people. See how it all hangs together? Yeah. And so I just sort of kept going. I'm not sure they're all as tongue-in-cheek as the first one. That's happened to Star Wars, didn't it, too? Star Wars was very tongue-in-cheeky at the beginning, and then they started taking itself more and more seriously. Maybe that's not a good thing. Anyway, I don't remember your question, but that's
Neither do I. But I'm sure it was brilliant, and you've answered it brilliantly, so thank you. What else did I want to ask you about? Oh, have you found, when you said your first book was successful, 44 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. So yeah, that is by every definition successful. And then Nick was also asked to write the screenplay for the film, which he also did. But my question is, which do you prefer, writing screenplays or novels? You do both with tremendous success and beautifully, if I may piss off.
Feel free. I won't insult you by saying no. It's they're completely different disciplines.
Yes.
When you are writing a screenplay, you are drawing up a blueprint for a building, and you may not be the builder of the building, and you are answerable to the people who are paying you for the blueprints. Screenplays also typically adhere to a dramatic format, which novels don't. A novel can be in the first person, can be in the third person, it can be 200 pages, it can be 2,000 pages, very elastic form. And you are answerable to the studio, to the producer, to the director, to the star. And you have to try to fit into what everybody requires, and then they hire somebody else, and so on. Whereas in a novel, you're only limited by your own abilities, whatever those abilities may be. You are in total control. No one can say no to you. No one can change it without your permission. It's a whole different ball game. It's also a lonelier ball game. It's just you and the thing, and it's not people calling up and saying, "May I see some pages?" Which you don't have to sell them for a book. But the actual mechanics of drama versus a novel, even taking aside everything that I just was saying, are very, very, very different. Drama has certain rules. Whether they're rules or observations, you read Aristotle's Poetics and you'll find out that a drama asks a question at the beginning, and the audience stays to find the answer to the question. Will Hamlet kill the king? Once the king is dead, people go home. That's it. So it's the job of the dramatist to raise as much suspense as to the outcome of that question as possible. Oh, the king is praying, he's not going to do it because he might go to heaven. Or, the king is behind the curtain, and how it runs him through. Oh, no, it isn't the king, it was somebody else, and so forth. And so you stretch that out. The novel doesn't have to obey any of that. In both cases, you could ask the question, what is the purpose of art? What is it that we're trying to do, regardless of the medium? Tolstoy says the purpose of art is to teach you to love life. But it's probably not the only purpose. It could teach you to endure life. It could teach you to relook at life. It could teach you to, or help you to escape life. And those things are true whether it's a movie, a book, a piece of music, and so forth. I'm very big on art helping us to kind of escape life, to have a little breathing room from the sort of troubled world that we seem to always find ourselves living in. And just for a little while, it could also be said, as long as I'm free associating, Doctor, that detective stories deliver the exact opposite of what they promise. Detective stories, thrills and chills and dead bodies splayed at unnatural positions on the floor, and that head is bashed in for the, you know, and people like to curl up with this stuff. I want to take a good mystery to bed. You go, what are you thinking? Well, what you're thinking is that it isn't you. You know, it's somebody else. Poor Hamlet. And so what Aristotle calls catharsis through pity and terror, at the end of which the problem is solved, the murderer is caught, and we're led to believe that some semblance of ongoing stability can be reestablished. I mean, not every detective story ends so conveniently, but certainly the classic examples, the Agatha Christie's and so on. I think Doyle is a little different because Holmes doesn't always succeed. Holmes sometimes fails, which also adds to the realism of it.
And he also lets the murderer get away.
Yes.
Yeah. But you said you have all this freedom when you're writing a novel. That's not so true in detective novels. There are rules that you have to follow. So it's not you can do anything you want if it's 2,000 pages and so on. No, you establish the situation, and then you have to come to a conclusion, or your reader is going to be very disappointed in you. Okay. And there are people who can tell you no. They're called your editor.
I've seldom had one. I did a panel in Los Angeles with this is recent, this is like a month ago, with 3 mystery stories grandmasters, which is, these are the grand fromage. This is a big deal. This is Laurie King, Walter Mosley, and who is it?
Michael Connell.
Michael Connell, yes. And Michael, I said, what's your relationship with your editor? I said to Michael Connolly. And he said, I only want to hear one thing from my editor. Thank you very much. I think editors have become scarce. I think they've become deal makers most cases. Present company obviously accepted because you're very involved, but not always. And I remember with a previous novel of mine, I was said to my editor, well, don't you think that maybe if this chapter ended like 2 pages earlier and we spilled that over into the next thing, that might be good? And he goes, oh yeah. Anyway.
How much research did you have to do on this book? At lunch, I saw that you have an extraordinary memory, and that's blowing no smoke. It was like a tutorial in Alexander Dumas, for example. Nick remembers an entire life history of 3 generations, which was fascinating. So maybe you remembered everything about World War I and the Zimmerman letter, but did you have to do a lot of research? Because you had a lot of real life people.
It's a combination of a lifetime of reading history and biography and sort of making mental notes of things that just stick. At some point I learned and this has nothing to do with the book, that Samuel Morse, the inventor of the Morse code, was a painter. There's a statue of him in Central Park. He was an accomplished painter. I didn't use any of that in the book, but it's the sort of thing that, oh, I didn't know he was a painter, and you just remember that. Then I walk around with this, which is not Mao's Little Red Book, but it's Meyer's Little Red Book, not quite the same. And it will say, you know, a line of dialogue, and underneath, pick up dry cleaning. So that it's not very organized, but things get put down there. I think this book took off from the final Sherlock Holmes story, which is called His Last Bow. And in His Last Bow, which is a curious story because it's not claimed to be Watson writing it, it's a third-person narrative. You learn that Holmes has been in the United States for 2 years in the run-up to World War I, undercover as an Irish sympathizer named Gideon Altamont. And that was very tantalizing to me, and he was trying to outwit this German spy master, von Bork. So it took a long time of playing around with a lot of information that the reader needed that you didn't want to sound like exposition. And it was a trial and error process where some unlucky friends of mine were dragooned into reading the same 30 pages again and again and again. And then you find out where the longeurs are and wouldn't it be better if, and so forth. So, in the meanwhile, you have a lifetime of reading Barbara Tuchman or lots of information about World War I and right before it, the Proud Tower, before you get to the Guns of August, before you get to the Zimmerman telegram and all that stuff. And it just kind of sticks to you. And how do you tell when you're finished anyway? How do you know when it's over? And for me, it's when ideas stop coming in. I call them stragglers. Like you go on a hike with a dozen people and the fast people wind up at the thing, and then there's people that, so those ideas, don't be in a hurry to hit send. You know, just wait. And other stuff trickles in. I don't know, and I don't know that anybody here could tell me where ideas come from. But I do know they come at the oddest time. Back when Los Angeles used to have water, I used to sit in the tub and just watch my toes start wrinkling, and suddenly I knew how to adapt the human stain into a movie. And I don't know where they come from.
When Stephen King was here years ago,
Stephen who?
he was a genre writer. Somebody said, "Well, where do you get your ideas?" It was the worst question that every author gets asked. And he said, "Binghamton." There's a little shop, and I get a six-pack, and you know, I've got my ideas for that. But you don't know this place?
The branch is the ideas. Socrates is told by the oracle at Delphi that he's the wisest man in Greece. And he figures that cannot be right. So all I have to do is find somebody wiser than me. So he goes into all sections of Greek society and finally works his way around to the poets. And he figures, well, these people, and I think we're talking about artists in general, sculptors, painters, and they're all guys back then, who write and paint so wonderfully and insightfully about the human condition, are going to prove to be wiser than me. He said, imagine my surprise. These were the stupidest people I knew. They were like children. They were like children, except when they did their art, and then they go into a kind of trance and take dictation from God, and this they call inspiration. And then when it's over, they come up for air, and it's hours later, and they don't know where the fuck they've been, and they go back to being jerks. Exhibit A.
I'm sure you saw Amadeus to prove your point. You actually had a point that I want to just quickly ask about, and then we can ask have some people ask questions.
If there are.
If there are. You were talking about, like, when do you know to end it, when stuff stops happening? One of the things that is really interesting about this book is there are episodes. It's not a single narrative. There are things that it is an overriding narrative, of course, but there are all these episodes of things that happen along the way. And I suppose the book could have been twice as long if you had had more of these episodes, if you had more ideas of things
If I could have
within
thought of more. I think I don't write very, very long books. Isn't that good news? And one of the reasons, I think, is that I have that kind of movie idea in my head from my basic other life as a filmmaker that, oh, it's supposed to be about 2 hours, and you always leave people wanting more. And I get very depressed when I'm nearing the end of a very long book and it still doesn't end. And I look and I say, there's more. And you have to sort of know when to get off the stage. So I've yet to write a really long book. This one comes it's almost long.
46 pages. We just made. Who has questions? No, I'm not asking you. Maybe I'll come back to you when everything else dries up. No one else has a question. Maybe I'll call you. Yes, sir. Since you're in the front row.
This is not a Star Trek question.
That's why I'm calling on you.
You had mentioned that Mr. Pensley was a very important help as an editor for this book, as an exception. Is there an Otto Penzler equivalent when writing a screenplay?
There are about 25. There are so many cooks in that kitchen. If at the studio there are people who have titles executives and associate executives, and when the script gets turned in, if every one of them doesn't have an opinion, why are they being paid? So every one of them has to have an opinion, and this is the reason that nothing gets done.
Yes.
Okay, actually, one or two choices. Did I talk about a technically related question or a non-technical question?
Loudly, whichever one it is.
So this is about 20
Will
years.
you repeat
I remember
the
reading
question when?
Yeah, I will.
Answer
I will.
thanks,
Yeah.
Nick.
Okay.
It's 20 years. I remember reading an article. It was announced you were going to adapt one of my favorite books, The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, and I never heard anything about it after the fact. I was wondering if you could possibly shed some light on this not too sort of topic.
Well, most of my best screenplays, I suspect, have never been filmed. It's just the way, the cookie crumbles. I
This
wrote
was a question about Theodore Roosevelt.
about what became of the screenplay that I wrote based on Edmund Morris's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, which I wrote for Martin Scorsese. And when I turned it in, I got a very excited phone call from Marty saying, "I love this." I should have known that was the. I don't know. It was for Leonardo DiCaprio to play young Teddy Roosevelt. Don't know why it wasn't made. And a lot of people won't tell you straight out, what it was. So I don't know the answer, but it remains a screenplay of which I'm terribly proud. Anyway,
Who else? Yes, sir. All the way in the back, you tall, handsome devil. You. That's you. Yeah. Yes, you. Ask the question.
I didn't raise my hand.
yes, sir, this guy over here.
When you're writing Sherlock Holmes, do you feel free to deviate from the Doyle canon if it serves your story, or do you feel you rigidly have to follow everything that Doyle set down in his stories?
I play by his rules. I play the game. I don't like most Sherlock Holmes movies. I never understood Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce. I don't understand why a genius hangs out with a jerk. It makes no sense to me. And also, I could never imagine Nigel Bruce as the man who wrote the stories. I'm a purist, and I try to find holes in the chronology in which to put. I also, as much as Basil Rathbone looks like Holmes and arguably sounds like Holmes, I can never see the wheels going around with that actor the way you can more with Jeremy Brett or even Robert Stevens in The Private Life. So I'm fussy that way. I wanna see the cerebration going on, and as I say, I try to play by the rules. And if he's going to do something unusual, I have to find a way to make it in character for Holmes as I read it. Here's a miscellaneous thought. All works of art are ineluctably products of the time in which they're created. Right? Mozart doesn't just sound like Mozart, he sounds like Middle European, mid-18th century music. And Renoir doesn't just always look like Renoir, he looks like 19th century French Impressionism. If I show you 4 movies that are all set in the year 1776, that's it. You would be able to tell within 5 minutes, 5 years of when each of those movies were made. Everything will give it away, despite all the research that was put into making it present and correct. So you got to live with that reality, except it plays havoc if you're a forger. Because forgeries, too, are ineluctably products of the time in which they're created. So my Holmes stories announce, more or less, through 1,000 details, what sensibility went into it, which was not Doyle. A lot of different political views or thematic or philosophical ideas. I try to do the best. Does everybody know the forgeries of the Vermeer painter Han van Meegeren? You know, van Meegeren's Vermeers sold for hundreds of thousands of pounds, and museums have them all over the world, and they stink. You look at it today and you go, this is Art Deco. It just jumps out at you. So I suppose every age gets the Sherlock Holmes that it deserves.
I'm glad I removed the cell phone from it. That shouldn't have been there.
You caught that one.
I did. I'm sorry. Yes, way in the back. I thought it was you before. What is it?
Shayna.
Oh, all right.
There you go.
Hi. So you mentioned that your first Sherlockian pastiche, 7% Solution, grew out of a writer's strike. I was wondering if the more recent strike had any impact on the writing of Infernal Telegram.
No, the telegram was finished when that happened, and I was on to Holmes #7, which will be out one of these days, called Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing, which is about art forgery.
That's great.
Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing, that's the
Yes, sir.
As you're writing your 7th novel, do you feel as a writer there are any areas on which you've improved, whether it's the voices of Holmes and Watson, prose?
the question is, do I feel after 7 Sherlock Holmes novels that I'm getting any better at it? I think I worry that I'm getting worse. That it's like writing in a foreign language. It's not the way I talk. It's not the way I think. It's the way Watson or Doyle. So you're writing in another language, and it gets. I get tired, and you have to say, "Wait, you're spinning cliches. Stop." And so it's a more labored. I hope it doesn't read labored, but it's more work intensive. When I wrote the first one, I was just having a good time and not paying as much attention. And now I have to. So it's a little bit tired. I suspect that the one that I'm finishing is probably the last one I'm going to do.
No, don't say that. We have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
Nick, how do you picture Holmes and Watson in your mind as you're writing. You've been exposed to so many different actors playing those roles.
How do I picture Holmes and Watson as I'm writing them? I picture them as figures in my head. I picture them the way I picture Doyle having written them, and I try to use or make reference to Doyle's description and take up from there and sort of build on that or echo that. It's the same thing that happens when you write a screenplay before it's been cast. I wrote this movie, which I think is a good movie, called Time After Time, about H.G. Wells. And before it was Malcolm McDowell, and before it was David Warner, and before it was Mary Steenburgen, it was just the people on the page. Once Malcolm, etc., gets cast, then you can't think about it without that anymore. But up until then, it's my private fantasy property. Anyway, thank you so much for